So the stock Cycle Analyst has now been updated to a 3.1 version, and the process of configuring an e-bike with a basic pass or torque sensor has changed a little bit. In this video, we're going to show how a basic pass sensor is configured with the latest version 3.1 Cycle Analyst firmware. So I've got here an e-bike that already had one of the 24-pole mini pass sensors installed on it, and we're going to step through all the stages of configuring the Cycle Analyst for pedal assist control with this sensor. The process is a little bit different than the 3.0 Cycle Analyst, and that's what this video is about, to show you the little differences. So as with anything, we enter the Cycle Analyst setup menu by pressing the left button, and the configuration of the pedal sensor is split over two menus: setting up the pass device and then configuring the Cycle Analyst for how it interprets the pedal signals for giving assistance. So the first thing you'll see on this pass device is that the second line shows a preview of all the information coming into the pass plug, and what we care about is that the two arrows beside the P and the D, that they move up and down as I'm turning the cranks. If you were to count how many times it does this for one crank revolution, you'd see 24 up and down transitions because I've got a 24-pole sensor. If you don't have the P arrow toggling up and down, the pedal sensor is not going to work on the bike, so troubleshoot the hardware before you get into messing around with the settings, trying to get things to work. So we enter the device menu, and here we're indicating what kind of sensor type do we have, and this is a basic pass sensor. It's not a torque sensor, it's not a road bike, it's a basic pass. And this is the number of pulses that we have per pedal rotation. I mentioned that this is a 24-pole sensor, so we want to set this to 24 pulses. Most of the magnet wings are going to be somewhere between 8 to 12 pulls. You just count the magnets for that. And if you get that wrong, then the RPM that it shows for your pedals cranks will be off by the amount that your number of pulls are off. And on the previous screen, you saw that both the P and the D arrows toggle. That's a 2-wire sensor. All the pass sensors from Grin are 2-wire. So the rest of this stuff, we're going to leave it at the default. We've configured it so we have a basic pass device attached here. So in the next screen, we're configuring how the system responds to your pedal sensing. So the default is no assistance. The Cycle Analyst would show your cadence, but it wouldn't provide any power to the motor. We're going to switch this over to basic power mode. This is the same as auto pass on the 3.0 Cycle Analyst firmware, and it means whenever you're pedaling, the Cycle Analyst is trying to output a given power, a fixed amount of power to the motor. So we choose basic power, and here's where we choose how much power we have while we're pedaling. So normally this would be less power than your full throttle power with the throttle. This is the maximum power that you'll get when you have an auxiliary input device to adjust your pedal level. So this is a bike that can do much more than 500 watts. It's going to be about 1200 watts peak with the throttle. I might say a maximum pedal assist power of 800 watts would be appropriate for this motor setup. Okay, this here allows you to scale the power for your cadence. If you pedal faster, you get even more watts on top of the baseline 800 watts. That's a more advanced feature that we don't need to get into now. And the rest of these things can all be left at their defaults. So now we've configured this Cycle Analyst for a basic pass sensor with 24 poles. We see the arrows toggle up and down when we turn the pedals, so we know that it's installed correctly. And we have 800 watts of power whenever we're pedaling. So first thing is that on the third display screen here, this is where you can see in one screen your pedal RPM, and if you have a torque sensor, your human watts. What I'm going to do now is spin the pedals backwards, and you notice how there isn't any RPM showing up on the screen. If I pick the wheel up and spin the pedals forwards, you now see the pedal cadence and you hear the wheel taking. In many installations, it would actually be the opposite. By default, I'd have to spin the crank backwards in order to see an RPM here rather than forwards. If that's the situation with your setup, when you're in this menu screen here for setting up the pass device, there's a fourth screen here is the direction polarity. You would change that from 5 volts forwards to 5 volts reverse to 5 volts forwards. In this case, this particular sensor installed on the left side, 5 volts equals reverse is the correct sense for forwards pedaling to be treated as forwards pedaling. So now I'm going to hop on the bike, turn the pedals, and what do you see? Woo! You see power. Now you see, as I'm pedaling, the system automatically regulates and produces 800 watts of power, which is a ton of power riding around a little park like this. So there you saw it. Whenever I was turning the pedals, I was getting 800 watts of power from the motor. That's a lot more power than you'd want on a typical pedal-assisted bike, but on any typical pedal-assisted bike, you want to be able to adjust that power while you're riding. And so the adjustment of your pedal assist system happens through the auxiliary input devices. And on this bike, I've actually got two different aux input controls. On my left side here, I've got the digi aux buttons that let me digitally control setting up and down. And over on the right side here, you can see I've got a potentiometer dial. So this is a knob that would let me adjust the pedal assist level. So I'm going to show you how to configure either of those things to vary that pedal assist between 0 to 800 watts instead of always being at full power. So we're going to do this first with the digital aux control. I find those are the most convenient and preferred for people. So here we're setting up our digital aux input. Right now we have no digital aux selected, so we're going to choose our 2-button aux input control. And here's where we choose the function. So on a basic pass sensor or on a torque sensor, if you want your digital aux to control your pedal assist level, you set that to pass level. Okay? Here's where we control the default when you turn the bike on. And here's the number of assist steps that we go from 0 to maximum. So I set the maximum pass power to 800 watts. Personally, I like doing about 100-watt increments for my pedal control. That's enough resolution that I'm not finding I want to go in between 2 different assist settings. To get 100-watt steps from 0 to 800 watts, I'm going to need 9 steps. So I'm going to change this from the default of 5 steps over to 9 steps. Okay? And this here lets me set a minimum. If I want a minimum assist less that's above 0, I could set that to say 20%, and then I would have 180 watts, the lowest setting. For pedal assist, you almost always want the ability to go all the way down to 0 watts. So leaving that at a 0% minimum makes a ton of sense. And now you can see my digital aux input is configured for assistance. So the other option is to use the analog potentiometer for setting your assist level. So here you can see it goes from 0 volts up to 5 volts as I spin the dial. Here that has been disabled. If you want to use the analog aux input, it's the same thing. For the control type, we're going to choose the potentiometer, and for the function, we're going to set the function to be pedal assist level. Okay, and now we can leave the deadbands at their default. So now you can see as I turn the aux potentiometer dial, my watts will go from 0 up to 800 watts, and say I set it to 250 watts. 220 watts. As soon as I start to pedal the bike, you'll see my actual power is going to stabilize right at 250 watts, whatever that set point was. And as I'm riding, I can easily increase that or decrease that based on the amount of power that I want as I'm going. So that shows the very basic setup of a pass sensor with a version 3.1 Cycle Analyst. There's a lot more advanced features and tweaking that you can do. That's the subject of a more in-depth video, but to be up and running, all you really need to do is configure a basic pass, set the number of poles, set the baseline power that you want, and then if you have an auxiliary input device, which you should really have, configure that for pass assist, so you can either use the up-down buttons or the potentiometer to vary the power as you're riding the bike.